They weren't healers, they weren't heroes, and that bird mask, not a filter, a perfume jar. The plague doctor was Europe's strangest invention. A walking crow gliding through streets where doors were nailed shut and hope was already gone. Behind the costume was no miracle cure, only bizarre rituals. Herbs stuffed in beaks, canes used to poke the sick from a distance, contracts that promised hazard pay, but not survival. They became symbols of death, then carnival costumes, then horror icons, from frog remedies to bureaucrats in bird cosplay. Here are 17 shocking facts about plague doctors that will change how you see them forever. The beak wasn't built to filter germs. No one even knew germs existed. It was a medieval air freshener, crammed with lavender, roses, mint, cloves, even garlic stuffed into vinegar-soaked gauze. The idea was simple. If plague came from foul smells, then maybe good smells could push death back. So every doctor became a walking potpourri jar. Their breath came through a beak stuffed with flowers, while corpses rotted at their feet. It didn't cure a thing, but at least, as you coughed your last, your doctor smelled like cloves and roses, the sweetest lie of the Middle Ages. The beak wasn't the only strange piece of the costume. Look closer and you'll see dark glass discs sealed over the eyes. They were meant to protect against poisoned air, but mostly they made doctors look not quite human. Witnesses described the eerie, black, unblinking stare of the mask as worse than the plague itself. Through smoke, through torchlight. Imagine that bird skull with 2 giant bug eyes peering into your window. It didn't matter if you were sick or healthy. The sight meant death was near. Less healer, more alien, a creature with glassy eyes that watched you die. The beak got the headlines, but the coat was just as strange. Plague doctors wrapped themselves in long robes, coated with wax or animal fat, stitched tight at the seams. The shiny surface was supposed to keep disease from clinging, a 1600s version of a hazmat suit. But imagine the effect in summer heat. The wax trapped sweat, baking the man inside. The figure that stepped into your street wasn't just bird-like. It was glossy, hulking, sealed tight like some unholy machine. A doctor who looked less like salvation and more like something death had sent to finish the job. That long stick? Forget the image of a gentleman's cane. Plague doctors carried 6-foot batons and used them like multi-tools of dread. They poked patients from a distance, flipped blankets, prodded swollen buboes without ever getting too close. But the cane doubled as a weapon. When the desperate clung to them, clawing, begging for help, the doctor shoved them off like vermin. One jab, one crack across the shoulders. Imagine coughing up blood, collapsing at a man's feet, and being beaten back into the gutter. The cane wasn't for walking. It was for keeping the dying at arm's length. Literally. If you're still here, you're the kind who digs into history's strangest corners. Subscribe now. There are plenty more shadows waiting. If the mask looked strange, the cures were even stranger. One method? Take a live toad and press it against the swollen lumps of plague, the buboes. The idea was that the animal would suck out the poison. In reality, you've just got a squirming amphibian and a patient in agony. Some doctors went further, grinding the toad, mixing it with mint or wine, and making patients drink the sludge. The result was predictable: retching, choking, and no relief. Others bathed the sick in wine, burned herbs, or whispered prayers while waving incense. Science? Not even close. It was desperation disguised as medicine, and people clung to it because the alternative was facing death empty-handed. If plague didn't finish you, the cure might. Doctors clung to the ancient idea that illness was caused by bad humours in the blood. So they drained it, sometimes by slicing veins open, other times by covering you in leeches until you were too weak to move. The result? Patients often bled into collapse before the disease even had its chance, and doctors called that progress. Picture a feverish man, pale as wax, surrounded by squirming leeches, while his family prays he'll survive both the cure and the plague. It wasn't medicine. It was slow-motion suicide, written as science. When cures ran out, some doctors turned to desperation. They told patients to bathe in urine. Others swore by drinking it, warm, bitter, straight from the pot. The logic was twisted. If disease poisoned the body, recycling its waste might cleanse it. Instead, the sick gagged, vomited, and grew weaker. One chronicle describes a child forced to swallow cupfuls until he collapsed. It cured nothing. But in an age where everyone was dying, even the foulest ritual felt worth trying once. Urine therapy wasn't medicine. It was humiliation disguised as hope. Not every plague doctor was a doctor. In many towns, the costume was handed to whoever would take the job. Clerks, scribes, failed apprentices. Their role wasn't healing, it was paperwork. They counted the sick, listed the dead, and recorded who still had coin to pay. Imagine opening your door to a bird-masked figure, only to have him scribble your family into a ledger and walk away. Less healer, more census taker of doom. They weren't fighting the plague, they were documenting its progress, in beak and ink. If this has creeped you out, wait until you see what spies had to do to survive. Watch Your Life as a Medieval Spy. Same era, different mask, just as dark. The word doctor was generous. Most plague doctors weren't physicians at all. Some were barbers, others were university dropouts. A few were straight-up opportunists who saw the mask as steady pay. Contracts spelled it out. Collect bodies, visit the sick, keep records. No mention of actual cures. In Venice, one man with no training at all was hired simply because no one else wanted the job. It wasn't expertise behind the mask, it was desperation. The mask wasn't always a welcome sight. For many, seeing a plague doctor meant only one thing. Death was already on the street. Families slammed shutters, bolted doors, fled down alleys when the beak appeared. Some towns hurled stones, chasing the bird-masked figures away like demons. Even the healthy trembled, because if the doctor had arrived, it meant your neighbours were already dying, and you might be next. Doctors were meant to bring comfort. Instead, they spread terror just by walking past your window. For all the wax, herbs, and glass lenses, plague doctors still died in droves. The costume looked terrifying, but it wasn't airtight. Fleas still bit through boots, rats still spread disease, and the stench of death seeped through, no matter how many roses were stuffed in a beak. One Venetian account admitted that the doctors died faster than their patients. The mask was theatre, protection that didn't protect, a uniform that gave hope to the living, but delivered nothing but more corpses. Sometimes the doctor didn't carry medicine. He carried nails. When plague spread through a household, the order was simple: seal them in. Doctors hammered doors shut, trapping entire families inside with the sick. Neighbours watched as iron spikes bit into wood, and the wails began from within. Mothers screaming, children coughing. No one came back out until the bodies were dragged to carts days later. The hammer wasn't a cure. It was a death sentence disguised as public health. For most, the plague doctor wasn't a rescuer. He was a prophecy. The moment you saw that long beak and black coat, you knew the plague was already in your street. Children whispered that the birdmen were death's own messengers. Parents pulled shutters closed so their kids wouldn't see, as if shutting out the mask could shut out the sickness. It didn't matter if he carried herbs, a cane, or a ledger. His presence alone was enough. The mask wasn't a cure. It was the omen of death. The bird mask didn't vanish with the plague. In Venice, it became a joke. What once meant death now turned up at masquerade balls, parading through the streets during carnival. The same beak that terrified children was worn with silk, jewels, and laughter. Tourists snapped photos. Partygoers danced behind it. A costume born from pestilence was reborn as pageantry. The irony was sharp. The mask that once sealed families into houses now twirled through festivals under fireworks. From omen to entertainment, the Birdman had become a punchline. The plague doctor never really vanished. He slipped into horror. The beak shows up in paintings, in gothic novels, in heavy metal concerts. Video games turned him into a villain. Cosplayers stalk conventions in black coats and glassy eyes. That long nose and silent stare became shorthand for death itself. What started as a failed medical uniform mutated into one of history's favourite monsters. The Birdman of the Plague, now an icon of fear on every stage, from metal to memes. The cruelest fact of all, plague doctors were never hired to cure you. They were there to count, to record, to witness. Their job was to note who was sick, who had died, and who was still paying taxes. The costume made it look like medicine, but behind the mask was a clerk with a ledger, not a healer with a cure. People prayed for rescue. What they got was a man in a bird mask, signing their misery into history. Strip away the waxed robes, the herbs, the cane. What's left isn't a healer at all. It's a clerk in a crow costume, scratching death into a ledger with a feather pen. They weren't saving lives. They were bookkeeping the apocalypse. And centuries later, their mask still haunts us, not as medicine, but as the costume of death itself. And plague doctors weren't the only ones risking everything. Watch Your Life as a Food Taster next, the job where every meal could kill you.